Kia ora, I'm Jess from the External Communications team here at the FMA, and you're joining me for another episode of Jess Learns to Invest. I'm really excited. We've got Frances Cook on the podcast today. We're going to do a special International Women's Day episode for you. So we're going to be talking about women investors and how to grow your confidence. I'm super thrilled to introduce Frances to the podcast today. You were a financial journalist. You were a journalist previously. You've got 2 books and you've got a podcast called Making Sense. So I was super stoked to get you on the podcast today. I thought, who better to talk to me in our International Women's Day special of Jess Learns to Invest. So welcome, Frances. Thank you for joining.
Oh, thanks for having me. Honoured.
Before we kind of get into the topic of today, could you just introduce yourself to the audience and then just talk a little bit how you got into the financial space? Because I know you were a journalist first. So how did you kind of get into that financial education space?
Yeah, sure. So thanks again for having me on. It's really nice to talk about this stuff. Basically, I started out in the traditional media world. I was a journalist for years. I covered things like crime. I did politics for a while. And then I hit this point sort of in my late 20s where I was just like, I've worked really hard. I've got some promotions. I've got some pay rises. And I'm just not getting ahead, and I don't get it. I don't get what I'm doing wrong. It's making me feel really insecure. You know, one thing goes wrong and I'm going to be stuffed because I don't have my money sorted. And it was this very disquieting feeling because I'd always assumed, work really hard, get ahead, and everything will just magically sort itself out. And it didn't. It just didn't. And I started to wonder if, maybe the problem was me. And it was a little bit. But the good thing about being a journalist at that time, if you boil it down, a journalist is basically go out there, find stuff that you didn't know about before, and tell other people about it.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I think I can learn about money, but on work time. I'm just going to do that on work time. And so I started a podcast for my workplace. I started learning about money, interviewing people who were in the money world. And I just absolutely got the bug because I realized that there were some little changes. And I'm not here to say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you can be a millionaire overnight. But there are some changes that are available to just about everyone, and they will make your life much easier, and they're not that hard. And the thing is, you get that low-hanging fruit first, and you start to make some changes, you start to get more secure. Every little change you make makes it easier to make the bigger changes, the ones that can be truly life-changing. But even if you just make those little changes, those can be life-changing by themselves. And so as I was talking about it, learning about it, applying it in my own life, and then other people were listening to my work, reading my work, and also applying it, I saw how this really changed people's lives. And I just had the bug from there, and it's been down the rabbit hole ever since.
I love it. It's such a good point in you saying, sometimes it can seem too hard. And I feel like I'm at that stage now in my late 20s where I am looking at my money and I'm like, the concept of buying a house, it seems pretty far off. And it's so that's why I'm stoked to be doing this podcast as well. So I'm like, now I get to learn as well while hopefully educating other people. So it is really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's funny, isn't it? I think those big goals like buying a house, they are really big. They do feel really intimidating. For a lot of people, we're talking a deposit of maybe $100,000, which is such a big ask. It's really daunting. But it's like that thing of you start where you are with what you have, right? You build up an emergency fund. You start building up some bigger savings. You start pushing for a pay rise. You start putting your money to work, maybe investing. And actually, people will overestimate what they can achieve in 1 year. They will massively underestimate what they can achieve in 5.
Yeah.
I changed my whole life in 5 years. It was a night and day difference in 5 years, which is actually still a really small amount of time.
Yeah.
But you do need a little bit of time to let things snowball.
Yeah, I think often people think, a quick fix, right? I want money, I need it quickly. But from what I've learned so far through these episodes is kind of the long game is better. And like you say, 5 years, it's not actually that long. It flies by.
Yeah,
I'm like, how old am
exactly.
I now? Oh, God. It just goes nowhere.
Yeah, I know. Don't start me about that. I'm on like the industrial strength eye cream these days. So believe me, the time passes anyway. Let's make use of it.
Yeah, so true. And so to kick off, I'm kind of keen to know, why is it so important for women to invest? Because if I'm being completely honest, like I never actually thought about it until being asked to do this podcast. I was like, what is this investing thing? I don't get it. Why? So why is it so important? Specifically for women as well.
I'm going to start with a little bit of a scary stat.
Okay.
And then I'm going to finish with a nice one. Okay.
I
So
like that. Start with the bad.
stay
End
tuned.
with the
Bad
good.
news first, then good news. Older women are one of the fastest growing groups for being in poverty. So women often have to take time out of the workforce to have babies.
Yeah.
Which means their earning power is reduced, their savings are reduced, things like KiwiSaver is reduced. And then often we earn less throughout our lifetimes as well, which means earning power reduced, savings reduced, KiwiSaver reduced. And we often live longer, which means we need more.
Yeah.
And if you are married, your husband is likely to die first. So if you're relying on him helping you out, possibly not. Or you get divorced, also very common. And so women are, the fastest growing group to be in poverty, older women. And that is scary, and it should scare people. I'm sorry to come in like the bad news fairy there. The good news is we absolutely can do something about that. Now, there's a whole bunch of wider society level stuff we should do about that, about supporting women more, especially through those child rearing years. But if we want to focus on what can you do right now, it's learning more and arming yourself with knowledge, because it is actually quite revolutionary. It is an act of resistance and defiance to learn more about money and make sure that other people can't take advantage of you. That is one of the most powerful things you can do. And here's the really good news, is that while women are less likely to invest, when we do invest, we're better at it.
Yeah.
As an overall general trend, that. Right? So women tend to, because we're more cautious, generally speaking, we tend to say, okay, I'm going to learn more about this investing thing. I'm going to give it a crack. We figure out what we want to do, make the plan, and then stick to it. Generally speaking, that's how women invest. Men often will say, okay, yeah, great, investing, let's jump into it, let's give it a crack. And then we're willing to give it a try. But that higher risk appetite that means that they get in there means they'll also often try and buy and sell and try different things, and they're in and they're out, and they're paying fees every step of the way, and they're making, frankly, more emotional decisions. Everyone thinks that women are the emotional investors. Yeah, sorry, dudes, it's you. And they're trying to beat the market, which often means that they underperform it.
Yeah.
And so if you just take the time to learn a bit about your money and give it a crack, you're probably going to do really well. And you need to, because like I say, you're likely to live longer, you're likely to earn less. You can't wait for someone else to save you, but you can do some things that aren't that hard to save yourself.
Yeah, it was interesting because when I did do some research for this episode, it said women are less likely to invest, but we make better investors. And I was like, I'm not at all that surprised that we make better investors. We are good at lots of things, I must say.
We are.
So I'm curious to know, why do women make better investors? Is it just that we are less emotional, or are we better at kind of buying and holding? Like, are there any other techniques that make us better investors?
Yeah, and often this is like, obviously this is all generally speaking, right? There's lots of women who would behave differently, but generally speaking, women tend to do their research at the start, decide on their plan, and then stick with it.
Yeah, that's the key, right?
Same mentality that holds us back from investing in the first place, that caution and that wanting to know what we're doing, is actually, once we finally get there, a bit of a superpower, because then we tend to be like, okay, I'm looking at the research and it's that most people do really well just buying and holding and sticking with it, and if times get tough, then just leave it alone and wait for it to recover. So okay, I'll do exactly that. I'm not special. I'm not going to beat the odds. I'm just going to do what is proven to work for most people. And that works really well because it is what's proven to work for most people. And it is funny, even in my own relationship, like love my husband to bits and we have money conversations, and he does, for the most part, do the good old index fund buy and hold strategy, but he loves a dabble, and he'll have some like individual picks that he wants to do, and we'll constantly invest, you know, a little bit of competition between a couple. It's
I
fun.
love that.
We'll compare where we're at with our investments, and I'm so boring. I'm just straight into the index funds. I can't be bothered. I'm so busy all the time. I'm just like, get my money in the market, make sure it's doing its thing, and then I've got other things to do. I just need to make sure it's actually in there. So I'm just chuck everything into an index fund. I'm always a good couple of percentage points ahead of my husband. Yes. It drives him crazy, which I love.
There you go. You just proved the point, proved the theory.
Yeah.
So I feel like people listening to this podcast are probably like me and at that kind of beginning stage of maybe thinking about investing. What would your tips be on where to start? Like, are there certain types of investments that maybe women who are beginning their investing journey should look into first? Or, yeah, what would your tips be?
Obviously, this is generally speaking what would work for most people, right? But for most people, I think the hardest part is actually starting.
Yeah.
And so I'm a really big believer in just get started small. It's amazing now. You know, when I first started looking into this, Sharesies hadn't even launched yet. I think I was a good 6 months to a year into figuring all this stuff out when the Sharesies team got in touch and said, hey, we've launched this new online platform. We'd love to talk to you about it and talk about investments, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I'm not that old. I am old, but I'm not that old. You know, it's really new that we've got these micro investing platforms. And my response to them was, I don't know. We'll see if you're a legitimate company. We'll see if you stick around and survive, which is hilarious now to think about it when they've got, last time I checked, they had over 500,000 people investing through their platform now. They're a monster. But, you know, they were really new and fresh and they haven't been around that long. So the fact that you've got these options now of these legitimate, regulated companies that let you put in $1, $5, $10 means you can start small. And the thing is, you can do all the reading about investing, be like, okay, the share market goes up, it goes down. That's part of how I make money. That's no problem. It's fine. The first time your investments go down in value, no matter what you know, you're going to hate it. You're just going to hate it so much. So be aware of that. And then if you've started small, you're so much less likely to freak out. If you've built up like $200 in there and the market takes a dip, you're much more likely to be able to remember, okay, yeah, that's right. This is normal. This is fine. I'm ready for this. I'm prepared for this. Whereas if it's, say, you've saved up all this money and you've put it all in at once and it's $20,000 and that's everything you have, you're more likely to go, I can't do this. I need to rip my money out before I lose everything, which is the worst thing you can do in a market dip, but it's so hard to remember the first time.
Yeah.
And then as you keep investing, as you keep going, you'll have more dips. You'll probably have some big ones, some small ones. And by the time you eventually build up slowly to that $20,000, you'll have had so many dips along the way. You'll know deep within you, this is fine. I've done this before. You've almost sort of built up a little bit of muscle memory on that. So I think learning by doing and starting small, so powerful. It's actually, everyone always says to me, oh, you know, is it worth putting in $5 a pop? For starters, yes. $5 is better than $0. But secondly, you are learning by doing. The learning that you're doing is actually the most valuable thing at that beginning stage.
Yeah, that's such a good tip saying $5 because I think my idea of investing before starting all of this was just that you had to have a lot of money, right, to start. So I was just like, well, I can't do it, you know. And there's all these movies out there that kind of pin women as being not good with their finances, and you kind of grow up with these films of like, you know, women shop and they spend all their money. And so I love that like you don't have to have a ton of money to start investing. $5 can grow, and like you say, then you're not going to have that moment of panic that you've just put all your life savings into something. I think that kind of takes the anxiety away a little bit from me as well, of like, cool, I can start. I don't have to panic and put everything I have into it. Yeah, so cool.
Yeah, 100%. And it does drive me nuts, the messages that we see aimed at men versus women. You know, you mentioned there about the movies and, you know, Confessions of a Shopaholic.
I was going to say,
movie.
I love that movie.
Love it.
I love
but,
it.
like, you know, I just wish that wasn't the main way we saw women depicted. And we often see this in terms of even, you know, I'll take on my own industry that I've come from. You know, a lot of the articles aimed at women are talking about coupon clipping and budgeting and save here, save there, you know, cook for less. And a lot of the articles aimed at men are about go for that pay rise. Here's how crypto works. Invest and get ahead and build something. And both are useful, right? But the idea of there's only so much you can ever cut back. And you hit a point where you can only make yourself so small.
Yeah.
Whereas there's no limit on how much you could earn, how much you could build. You know, the limit is how much do you want? And so it does drive me nuts, the messages that we aim at people, because even when it's not explicit, people can take that in and it becomes part of this, one of the most difficult mindsets, I think, to get around, because we don't often think it consciously. One of the most difficult mindsets is, oh, that's just not for people like me.
Yeah.
And that's really hard, especially if you are not thinking it consciously. To get around it, because you will just, before you've even looked at it properly, you'll just go, not for me.
Not for me, yeah.
And it could be great for you. And I think that's why it's so important to have women speaking about these issues, all types of different women as well. Because if you see someone who you identify with, who you feel is someone like you, then you're like, oh, well, if they're doing it, maybe I could. And it just gets you past that initial hurdle of not even looking at it.
Yeah. That's so true. Like, you just often see men and people that maybe aren't like you investing. And so I definitely grew up with that mindset of like, it's not for me. I don't know what it is, but it's not for me. And it's like, I didn't even look into what it was. So that's so true. Like, we just need to get more of that education out, like what you're doing with your podcast and the books, is just showing women that it can be done. And there are women already doing it. And so that kind of makes me feel better as well.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And so how can women balance sort of short-term and long-term investments? Because what I've learned so far is sort of long-term is the way to go. And so I'm sure people have like both short-term and long-term goals. Is it better to kind of have one main goal as kind of your reason to investing, and that's kind of your investment strategy? Or because often we have lots of goals, right? So
and I think the most important thing, right, is figuring out actually what your goals are. And I often like to talk to people like, you know, if you won lotto, what would you do? Because it's fun, right? Who doesn't like daydreaming about $1 million landing in your lap? But at the same time, it's going to show you your money values, whether you say, I'd buy a house and pay it off, or I'd go traveling for a year, or I'd help out my parents, or I'd take 3 years off and just spend it with my kids. All sorts of different things you might want to do, right? But it's going to show you immediately what your money values are, and what sort of life you would like to build with money. And then you say, well, okay, what version of that, let's work backwards from there. What version of that can we build without waiting for lotto? And again, with the small changes that can help you build there faster than you'd think, but just maybe you would like to spend more time with your kids, and that might mean going part-time instead of the lottery win of just not working at all. And how can you build that? How could you do that? And it's really, really helpful to have that goal, because sometimes money changes will require a bit of sacrifice from you. You're never going to make that sacrifice just because someone like me is sitting here being like, make sure you have some savings, make sure you do some investments, it's good for you. Nobody does that just because it's good for you. Otherwise, we'd all eat a lot more broccoli as well, right? Like, we just don't. There needs to be a reason why you're doing this, and it needs to feel real to you. In terms of balancing the sort of long-term versus short-term, I often try to think about things in terms of a money timeline. Like, you need your now money sorted, obviously, because right now you have to get through your day-to-day. You have to eat. You have to have a roof over your head. You have to be getting through life and not feeling totally miserable. But you also can't YOLO it up every single day and not have any consequences for that. And eventually you're going to run out of road on that. So you also need to have some future building money. So if you think in terms of your money as a timeline of what do you need right now in order to keep yourself fed, housed, comfortable, then what do you need that you might be spending in a year or so? And that would be things like your emergency savings, things to make sure that if your car needs a repair, you can sort it out without going into debt. And then what could you be putting aside and leaving alone for 5 to 10 years, maybe more, and you don't need that money right now and you can just let it do its thing? That's your investments money. And again, that might be $5. It might be a tight budget depending on where you're at in your life. But start there, build it up when you can. You get a little pay rise, you can increase it to $10, $50, whatever. Your future building money will increase over time. What's important is that you start, because you're more likely to, if you get a pay rise, say, ooh, I can increase my future money from $5 a week to $20, rather than you're not doing it at all. You're not even going to be thinking about it. That money's just going to disappear. That's just human nature. So get started with something and you can build it up over time. It's so worth it.
And I think it's really important to think about those first steps. And often what I see is, it feels like a while ago, chatting about money was such a hard thing, to have a conversation about money, not just investing, but money in general. And I sometimes find, like, for women as well, it can be quite hard to just have those money conversations. And like, if you've got a partner and you're both thinking about investing, like, how do you start that conversation? And I think I'll try not to keep this story too long-winded, but my parents, for example, my dad did all their finances. He did everything. And I think my mum was not really across it whatsoever. And there was an instance a year ago where, she went to buy a coffee somewhere and couldn't. And my dad just hadn't transferred some money into a certain account. And he rings me and he's asking for some money. And so I just helped them out. And then she's ringing me going, oh my God, like, this was the most terrible experience. I was so embarrassed. Like, all I wanted to was to buy a coffee when I was out. And then finally that sparked her going to him going, what's our financial situation? Like, why did this happen? And I think it was really great to see that now they sit down every week and write down all their bills out. Now they talk about money. And so I guess that leads me into my question of how do you just start having money conversations? Because sometimes that's where you can start to look at your money as well, especially if you've got two incomes. It's sort of like, have that conversation. It doesn't have to be, feels like money conversations are scary. You kind of don't want to talk about it.
They are. Yeah, money conversations are scary because they cut to the core of everything that is really vulnerable about ourselves. We often use money, and to be clear, I don't think this is true, but money is often used as a signifier of how important we are or how smart we are, or all of these other things that really are vulnerable, soft spots. So if you feel like you don't have enough or you don't know enough about it, it can feel like a failing for you as a person. Again, I don't think that's true, but I understand that this is something that comes up over and over again. And it's funny what you say there about your parents. That's super duper common. It is often, and again, this is a real generalization, but women often do leave a lot of the money management to their partners, feeling like it's a sign of trust and a sign of love, and leave it to them. And yet the other side of it is, a lot of men in that situation say they feel a real weight of responsibility of it being all on them, and they actually wish they could share it a bit more. So it's an interesting dynamic that can build up there. And I think for starters, even if you're in a good, healthy relationship, help out your partner. It's two heads are better than one. But secondly, it can also go really wrong really easily if you're not paying attention to your money, because sometimes the men aren't doing what you thought they were with it. And it can go really bad really easily. So I would say at least sort of once a month, possibly more if that works for you. Some people have weekly money dates, but at least once a month, sitting down, having a chat about what's going on, just running through the bills. Is everyone still happy with this? We've put some extra money into KiwiSaver. Is everyone happy with that? Or we've made these investments. Does that work for you? And try as hard as you can, because money is going to touch on some very tricky issues at points. It's naive to think that there's not the possibility for arguments. That's why we don't like talking about it, because we've probably had those arguments before and we don't want to do it again. So as much as you can, try to just get ahead of that by making it fun. Open a bottle of wine or a packet of Tim Tams or whatever. Try to make it a nice experience. And I also think maybe don't dive straight into the tough conversations. Maybe you don't actually start going through the bills. Maybe you don't actually start with going through your investments. Start by talking about, what do you want out of life? The lotto question. What would you do if you won lotto? What do you want? And have some of those fun conversations. Or maybe, what's your earliest money memory? Did you ever talk about money with your parents? And that's going to help you understand where someone is coming from and some of their attitudes to money. Start with those softer things that are outside of the here and now, because that's going to set a bit of a better track record. You're going to have more positive experience. You're going to have a bit more happy chats about it. That gives you a better grounding for when you have those bigger conversations. You get more used to talking about money with each other, and then you're better equipped for having those other conversations, which are super important, but sometimes really hard to start off with.
So hard. Yeah, I love the idea of just having some Tim Tams or something, just to make the conversation more relaxed. That's such a good idea. And do you have any tips for just women building confidence in general with their finances? Because we've kind of touched on that women are less likely to invest, and maybe we're just less confident in general, not just investing, but in general with our finances. How can we kind of build that confidence up? Because it would be awesome to see that trend of, it's not just the male if you're in a relationship dealing with the money, the females can own it as well. How do we build that confidence that we know what we're doing? Because I think it's that stigma of but I don't know what I'm doing. So,
and I think this is applicable in all areas of life, right? And it was very applicable in my career. Have you ever walked into a room and it's a work meeting or whatever, and you're just oh my God, these people who are paid more than me and have a more senior position than me have no idea what they're on about and how did they get there? And if they're able to do that, why aren't I doing that? Because I definitely know more than they do.
I've had that. Right? Been in that situation, We
don't need to name names, but we've all been there. And there is an astounding number of people getting through life doing really well because they simply don't have the self-awareness to realize that they're not actually very good. And so they just crash on forwards and it goes really well for them, because actually 9 times out of 10, all of the things that you're worried about going wrong don't happen. So if there are all these incredibly mediocre people doing well with their money and frankly probably doing better than you, just because they're confident enough to give it a crack, why shouldn't you give it a crack? And I can sort of come at it from the point of, I'm never going to feel 100% confident in what I'm doing. There's always something I don't know. There's always more to learn, which is an exciting part of life, don't get me wrong. But it can also hold you back and make you feel less confident. But enjoy that ride. Just learn more things as you go for it, and that's great. But also remember that there are people with less knowledge than you doing better than you just because they gave it a crack. So just give it a crack.
And that comes back to just starting, right? Because sometimes we feel like we got to know everything to start something, but it's that's not the case.
How often do we know everything? You start a fitness routine and you might, there might be all of these running techniques and things that you can do and blah, blah, blah. All right, but just pull on your shoes and go for a run.
I've just started running, so I love that. It's so true. Yeah, totally. And I'm kind of keen to, because we're kind of on this chat about just money and finances in general, for the single women that are listening, because I remember early 20s, you just get asked constantly, when are you buying a house? When are you doing this? When are you doing that? And it can be quite hard when you've got one income, you're in control of your money solo. How can you be in control of your finances and kind of feel like you can still achieve your goals without necessarily having a second income from a partner.
And I don't want to minimize it. It is harder when you're flying solo. I think the biggest thing first is sometimes to just, there will always be tips and tricks, things you can try, things that can make it a little better to get ahead. But I think the first thing is to just give yourself that bit of grace of, it is a bit harder and you're not crazy, and it's okay to acknowledge that and say, I'm still going to try and get ahead, but it's harder, and that's okay to admit. So first of all, giving yourself grace. And then I think the best thing you can do is to look at what you've got, be really honest about what you need right now and what you can use to build for the future, and then automate everything that you can, because you've got to make it easier for yourself to do the good things and harder to do the bad things that'll hold yourself back. So automating your savings, your investments, your whatever else, making sure that whips out of your account the day after payday so that you stay on track with your goals, whether or not you're feeling motivated that week. That is just massive, because it will build up so much faster than you think. And I think a lot of people have had that experience with KiwiSaver. Now that KiwiSaver has been going for a while, people will check it and go, oh, heck, I've built up quite a lot of money.
Yeah, I did that the other day. I was like, ooh, go me.
Right? And it's just like 3% of your pay, and it builds up really quickly. And so if you can do that, if you can automate so that whatever your future building goals are, going out automatically, it's going to build up fast. You're going to look in there in a year and be like, oh, actually I've done quite well. Go me.
That's such a good tip, to automate stuff, because we get busy and we just forget.
100%.
And also for me, I hate seeing the money go out, which is ridiculous, I know, because money comes and money goes. But if it's automated, I'm like, sweet, I don't have to see myself losing this much money. I can it just does it. So it's a great little tip. And then to flip it on the other hand, I'm not in this situation, but for women that are having kids or on maternity leave, thinking about having kids, I would imagine that financially that's quite a change, right? Because you're taking time off work and all that kind of thing. How can you feel like you still have control over your finances and your money when you're taking time off work and you might not be the one that's earning the most at that time?
Yeah. And again, I think starting from a place of being like, this is going to be a bit harder and it might be a little bit of a setback at first. And admitting that is a good thing. That just takes a little bit of that mental pressure off. You're not an idiot. You're not doing it wrong. It just is hard. And as much as you can, preparing ahead of time is going to really, really help you. If you're someone who, even if you're in your 20s and you're like, I would like to have kids probably in my 30s.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with setting up long-term savings goals and investing goals that include the fact of, at some point, I'd like to take a break to have kids. But even if you're thinking, okay, we're pregnant now or going to be trying to have a baby soon, building up those savings as much as you can is going to help, because going down to one income for a while, or at least one and a bit income, because the maternity leave payments are not that much and they do only go for 6 months. You're going to need a little bit of cushion in there that will help you. So if you can prepare in the months leading up by as close as you can trying to live off one income, and then you get a little bit of a test drive of what sort of expenses crop up that you weren't expecting, how all this is going for you, do you need to change anything? You get a little bit of a test run while you've still got that fallback option of you are actually both earning. And also, everything that you get to save is then set aside for that time when you are off with the baby. So it's a little bit of a twofer there. Now I know obviously the cost of living has gone up. That's not always easy for people, but as close as you can to that, it's going to give you a little bit of a test run.
I love that kind of applies to lots of situations, like being on your own, just starting investing, setting some goals and having savings. So, I feel like investing helps you to set up for savings for whatever it might be, kids, house, travel. Some really good kind of fundamental tips on how to get started. And have you seen any investing, how do I put it? anything that people have done in terms of starting to invest that maybe they shouldn't be doing? Like, so is there any kind of investing no-nos that you have seen people do?
I think a lot of the time people feel like to do investing sort of right, they should be doing a lot. And it's, buying and selling and getting into crypto and doing all these things, being super active. Whereas actually a lot of good investing should feel kind of boring. The goals it will get you to should be anything but boring.
Yeah.
But the investing itself probably should be a bit boring. And a lot of your standard investing advice, and the reason why it's standard investing advice is that it has shown over and over again that it makes the most money for the most people, is stick your money into something like an index fund that goes into hundreds of different companies, leave it alone for a few years and just let it do its thing. And, just sort of buying and selling and trying to pick companies and read their profit and loss statements and getting into crypto and all that stuff, trying to go straight into the spicy side of investing, you are going to feel overwhelmed. You probably are going to make some mistakes, and it might freak you out and you stop doing it entirely. Now, at some point, you might decide that you do want to try out the spicy side of investing, and maybe it goes well for you. It goes well for some people. It doesn't go well for a lot of people, but some people it goes well for. And some people just enjoy it, which, fine. There are less expensive hobbies out there, but you do you.
Yeah.
But at least start with the basic stuff. Have your broccoli first, and then you can put some cheese on it later.
Yeah.
Start out with the stuff that is proven to work for the most people. Make sure your money is doing what you want it to do. You can have a little play on the side later, but just don't overcomplicate it. Just get going with the stuff that we know works for just about everyone.
Yeah. And I think we can kind of say that applies to any age as well, right? Like, because if you are listening and you're like later in your life and you're thinking, well, I've missed my chance, like, just start, right? Is that kind of, would you say that?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, there are so many people who will message and be like, oh, I'm 40, is it too late? I'm 50, is it too late? I'm 60, is it too late? And if you think about it, I mean, everyone's living longer these days. I would love to live into my 90s, which means even if I'm in my 60s, then I might have 30 years of retirement to go.
Yeah.
Now, the standard rule for money that you're putting into investments is you want to leave it alone for 5 to 10 years at least. So you could still be investing in your 60s because you've got 30 years to go. You will probably want some of your money still earning and growing. Now, you might have your own sort of investing strategy that might be different for you, but I think this idea that you go straight into super conservative investments, things like bonds or even term deposits, as soon as you hit 65, it's not quite right for this age where we're living longer, and you might be needing to do things like pay for a rest home. You're going to need money to do that. So if you keep some portion of your money invested and earning and working hard for you, to me, that just makes sense. I don't see a time when I wouldn't be invested. I'll probably still be invested when I'm in my 80s.
Yeah. When did you start, actually? I'm just curious.
Oh, that late 20s, yeah. As I was, starting and trying this all out, I, gave it a crack. And, I say start with $5 a week. That's exactly what I started with. And I say that you're going to want to learn by doing. That's exactly what I did. It worked.
Yeah, kind of like learn as you go, right? Like, yeah. Listen to podcasts like these, learn a little bit, and then just start. Like, I think that's where I keep holding myself back, is like, I don't know enough yet. I'm too scared. I don't know which to start with. And there's lots of different types of investments. And I'm like, I don't know which is right for me. But I think, set some goals and then just start. And I'm keen to know your thoughts on the different types of investments. Like, there is so many. And that part of it is probably the biggest overwhelming factor for me, is kind of like, how do you know which type of investment is right for you? So let's say you've done your goals, you've done a little bit of research, and you're still like, oh my goodness, how do I choose?
Yeah. I think you start with what's your budget, and then what do you have the appetite for, right? So if we're thinking about some standard investments, you might look at property, right? But that's incredibly expensive to get started with. Great investment, don't get me wrong, nothing against property investors, but I don't have a spare $100,000 lying around for a deposit.
Nope, most probably wouldn't.
And many people don't, So that's probably off the table when you're starting out. And then, things like crypto, well, that's pretty technical and very risky. You probably don't want to start there. Things like gold and silver actually are very specialized. I think a lot of people, where that leaves them is the share market. And we now have much more options for getting into that in a controlled way, in a small sort of $5 a week way, and in a smart way, because the share market is just a bunch of businesses that you get to buy a little piece of ownership of. And so by doing that, you're a part owner and you get some of the profits, which is fantastic. People will talk about it like it's gambling. I mean, is it gambling going into work every day? Same thing. So it's just putting your money to work, having a little bit of the profits of businesses that are doing well. And then if you're looking at that and you're thinking, what's an easy way to do it? Well, the standard rule of investing is do not put all of your money into one thing. So one company can have a shocker of a time and it can go bust quite unexpectedly. Happens all the time. But if you've put your money into a fund, an index fund or an ETF that does something like track the 500 biggest companies in the US, or the 50 biggest in New Zealand, or the 200 biggest in Australia, there's all of these funds that put your money into hundreds of different companies. Well, the 200 biggest companies in Australia all collapsing at once, highly unlikely, to the point where I'm going to say it's not going to happen. And if it does, Australia is probably in the midst of a coup and getting overthrown. I just don't think that's happening. So, you spread your money around like that, and you start off with these little baby steps, and it just makes it a bit easier, where you can have something that fits your budget. You can just get going, and it's not out of this world risky. You can understand sort of where that money is going.
Yeah, because I keep hearing the term risk when it comes to investing. And often that word just stands out to me. And I'm like, oh, that sounds scary, because I'm not a risky person. I play it safe most of my life.
It's funny, isn't it? In the financial world, we talk about risk in a slightly different way from how people talk about it normally.
In real life,
which I think actually holds so many people back. Risk, I am not a risky person in my day-to-day life. I like to know exactly what's happening when I look both ways before I cross the street. I have to stop telling my son all the time, be careful, be careful, be careful, because that's all what I'm thinking. That's what's on loop in my head. But in the financial world, risk kind of just means more like how much goes up and down.
Right.
So it might go up a lot one year, it might go down a lot the other year. It doesn't necessarily mean you've lost anything. It's just going up and down in value, and you have to be ready to ride it out. And the trick with risk and your money is you often just need time to sort of smooth out those lines. And yet in the financial world, we never really explain that we're using this word that everyone thinks they know the meaning of, but we're kind of using it differently. And I think it puts so many people off.
Yeah, there is a lot of jargon. And I think the more I've done these episodes, I'm starting to understand that risk isn't this big scary word. It's not what I thought it meant. And I'm like, that's cool. Thank goodness, because everyone's like, choose where you are with your risk. And I'm like, I don't know, all the way down here.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I love a lot of risk in my investment portfolio, but that's about
different.
it.
Yeah.
I'm very conservative elsewhere.
So if someone's been listening this whole time and they've got us on in the car and maybe everything's gone over their head that we've talked about today, what is your top tip that women can leave today with? If you could get all your amazing knowledge that you have in your brain, what is your one top tip for women investors? Big question.
I think just start. I know I've said that already, but I think just start. There are so many. Think of some of those dumb, mediocre people you know, and the fact that they are probably getting ahead because they are just not self-aware enough to realize that they don't know enough. And those people, imagine if those people beat you in life.
It's not fair.
Just because they were confident enough to start. So, embrace that mediocre mindset and just go for it.
I love it. That's such a good tip. It's simple, it's like punchy. Just start. That's what I need. I just need to start.
You've got it. You can do it.
I know. I keep saying that after every episode. I'm like, I haven't actually started yet, but I will. I'm like, I just
do you know what? Attach a treat to it. What's like
That's a
a
good
little
idea.
treat that you enjoy? Like, is there a coffee shop that does like an Afghan that you really love or
I
something?
do love an Afghan. That's a good idea, actually. Yeah.
There you go. So you're not allowed an Afghan until you've started, but as soon as you set up that first payment, you can go get the Afghan.
That's good. I like that. Little bribery for yourself. Like, sometimes we've got to hold ourselves accountable. Because I'm like, I work
You can tell that I spend too much time around a 3-year-old. I also motivate myself as if I am 3 years old.
Sometimes we need that though, right?
Yeah, right? Be the 3-year-old that you want to see in the world.
That is my top takeaway from this episode now. I'm just going to go away with thinking about that. Because we work so hard for our money. I mean, like, I've worked since I did a paper round. Like,
Yeah.
I want my money to work for me rather than feeling like it's just sitting there doing nothing. So,
100%.
and to finish us off, could you tell people where to go to find out more? Where can they go to hear more from you? I know you've got an awesome podcast I talked about at the start, but yeah, tell people where they can go to get more information. If they're listening and they love you, they love your tips, where can they go?
So if you want to hear from not just me, but a lot of people much smarter than me who I interview every single week, the Making Sense podcast, which is Spotify, Apple, YouTube now as well, which is exciting. And also I'm far too active on social media. Terrible.
I was going to say, I've seen your TikToks. They're so good. Because my attention span is about this size. So I'm like, cool, a quick little video about money.
That's what we need.
Swipe.
Yeah. I'm with you. 30 seconds at a time. Just get your money info drip fed to you. So yeah, Frances Cook NZ on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook if you're still there. Yeah, it's a good time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Frances. I feel like I really learned a lot. And my key takeaway is I'm just going to start. That's what I've learned today. And I'm going to go away and do this after this. So thank you so much. It was so great to have you on.
Oh, thanks for having me, mate. It was lovely chatting.
Thanks so much for listening today. If you want to find out more about Frances, go and check out her podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. It's called Making Sense. And if you want to hear more from us, make sure you're following us for the next episode of Jess Learns to Invest. I'll see you next time. The content of this podcast is of a general nature and is not financial advice. The thoughts and opinions of guest speakers are not those of the FMA. The FMA recommends that our audience seek advice and respect to investing from a regulated financial advisor. The FMA does not accept any responsibility for loss that any person may suffer from following it.